When people in our little town looked at us, they saw the picture of stability, the suburban dream that magazines and church sermons always held up like a golden frame. My wife, Emily, with her calm smile and her blonde hair that seemed to glow every Sunday morning, and me, David, standing beside her in our neatly pressed shirts, hand on the shoulder of one of our two kids. We looked like the family next door that everyone trusted. Our house sat on a cul-de-sac where kids rode bikes until dinner, where neighbors waved when they mowed their lawns, and where every 4th of July the sky filled with fireworks launched from driveways while we all drank beer on folding chairs. That's the world we built for 20 years. I thought it was the fortress protecting me from chaos. I thought it was real. We'd been together since college. I met her at the University of Wisconsin, 1999. I was the kid who stayed in the library too long, trying to turn B-minuses into A-minuses, and she was the girl who walked in with confidence that turned heads. She wasn't loud, but she had that presence, the kind where you noticed her before she even spoke. When she did speak, it was with a soft, steady voice that carried weight, like she had already figured out the world and was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. I was hooked. By junior year, we were inseparable. By senior year, we were engaged. And after graduation, we moved back to Wisconsin, to a small town where life was slower, where we thought we could raise kids away from the noise. The first decade felt like the dream people sell you in Hallmark movies. We had our first child, Sarah. Then 3 years later, our son, Luke. Emily was the mom who volunteered at the elementary school bake sale, who organized carpools for soccer practice, who decorated the house for every holiday, even the minor ones. Our house had orange pumpkins on Halloween, twinkling lights on Christmas, even red, white, and blue ribbons for Memorial Day. I worked in insurance. Not glamorous, not thrilling, but steady. Steady was what mattered. I told myself providing was my role. Every Friday, I'd come home with groceries, grill steaks on the back porch, and after dinner, Emily and I would put the kids to bed and share a glass of wine. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch swing and talk about our future, retirement in Florida, road trips across the country, watching grandkids play in the yard. It felt solid. It felt unshakable. But if I'm honest, there were small cracks. Cracks I ignored because I trusted her, because love makes you blind to shadows when the sun is bright enough. Like the way she always kept her phone face down on the table. Back in the early 2000s, when flip phones first came out, she'd leave it anywhere, on the counter, in her purse, even in the bathroom. But sometime around 2014, when smartphones became everyone's lifeline, I noticed she guarded hers more carefully. Face down. Silent mode, always within reach. I told myself it was normal. Everyone got more private about their phones, or the nights when she said she was going to her book club. At first, I never doubted it. She loved reading, loved talking with her friends. But later, I realized I'd never seen a single book, not one. She'd come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. I knew her scent. I'd memorized it over 2 decades. But sometimes there was something else, sharp, almost citrusy, lingering on her clothes. Still, I ignored it. Denial is a powerful thing. When you've built a life on trust, admitting doubt feels like setting fire to your own house. One summer evening, when Sarah was 14 and Luke was 11, we hosted our annual barbecue. Friends, neighbors, church folks all came. I remember standing by the grill, flipping burgers, beer in hand, watching Emily laugh with the women as they set up the side dishes. She looked radiant, like the queen of the block. I thought, God, how lucky am I? I told myself any doubts I had were just paranoia. Everyone else saw perfection, so why didn't I? That night, after everyone left, I was cleaning up the yard when I found something strange. A receipt tucked under one of the lawn chairs. I almost threw it away without looking, but something made me pause. It was from a gas station, not ours, not anywhere near our side of town. It was across the river, nearly 40 minutes away. a place we never had reason to go. And it wasn't just gas. It was snacks, drinks, 2 fountain sodas, 2 candy bars, like someone on a road trip. I carried it inside and set it on the counter. When Emily saw it, her face didn't change. She just shrugged and said, "Oh, must have been when I drove out to meet Lisa last week. We grabbed gas and snacks. No big deal." And maybe it wasn't. But the way she said it, too smooth, too quick, it stuck with me. The weeks after that, I started noticing more little things. A second gym bag in the trunk of her car. Phone calls she'd take outside, pacing at the end of the driveway. Her laughter, softer, different, like a version of herself she never used with me. But even then, I convinced myself it was fine. We'd been married 20 years. She was my partner, my family, the mother of my children. Infidelity, betrayal. Those things happened to other people, not to us. Until the night it all changed. It was late September, one of those crisp evenings when the leaves start turning and the air smells faintly of bonfires. Emily said she was going to book club again. I kissed her goodbye, told her to drive safe. Hours passed. The kids went to bed. I sat on the couch, scrolling through channels, waiting for her. Midnight came, then 1 a.m. When I finally heard the garage door open, I stayed put. She walked in, cheeks flushed, hair slightly messy, like she'd been running. She smiled too brightly, tossed her bag on the counter, and said, "Sorry, we lost track of time. You know how it is." But I didn't know, and for the first time, I didn't believe her. I went to bed that night with a knot in my chest, a feeling like the floor beneath me was beginning to give way. And in that quiet, in the dark, I whispered to myself, "Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't show up with sirens and alarms. It drips in slow, steady leaks until one day you realize your whole house is flooded. That fall, after the night she came home past 1 a.m., I started noticing those leaks more than ever. Emily became distant, not in obvious ways. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still made dinner, still sat beside me in church. But it was the little things. Her eyes didn't linger on mine the way they used to. Her laughter with me felt polite, not spontaneous. When I told a story, she'd nod along, but I could tell her mind was somewhere else. And the phone, always the damn phone. It lived in her pocket, in her hand, next to her on the nightstand. Locked, face down. She claimed it was because she didn't want notifications lighting up the room at night. But I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she just didn't want me to see what lit it up. At Thanksgiving that year, the whole family gathered at my parents' place. Turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie. The traditions never changed. My mom beamed at Emily, telling her what a wonderful wife and mother she was. My dad pulled me aside, gave me a glass of bourbon, and said, "Son, you're a lucky man." I smiled, nodded, pretended to agree. But inside, I felt hollow, because I wasn't sure anymore if I was lucky, or if I was the biggest fool in the room. One moment that stuck with me happened after dinner. The kids were in the den playing video games with their cousins, and Emily slipped outside to take a call. I followed a minute later, pretending I needed some air. She was standing on the porch, whispering into her phone. I caught just enough to hear her say, "I miss you too. I'll see you soon." When she saw me, she jumped, stuffed the phone into her pocket, and forced a smile. "Just Lisa," she said quickly. "She's stressing about work again." I didn't call her out. Not then. I couldn't. My parents were inside. The kids were laughing. The holiday buzz was in the air. But my heart pounded like a war drum, and in that moment, I knew, or at least I thought I knew. Something was happening. December rolled in, and with it the chaos of the holidays. Lights strung across houses, Christmas carols on the radio, mall Santas in red suits. Emily loved that time of year. She went all out, wreath on the door, tree in the living room, stockings hung with care. She even baked gingerbread cookies shaped like reindeer, the way she always did since Sarah was little. On Christmas Eve, after the kids went to bed, Emily and I sat by the fire with mugs of cocoa. For a brief moment, it felt like old times. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "We've built such a beautiful family, haven't we?" I wanted to believe her. I wanted to freeze that moment and live in it forever. But even as she spoke, I couldn't stop thinking about the call on Thanksgiving, about the perfume on her clothes, about the late nights. It was like living in two realities at once, the dream everyone saw and the nightmare only I felt. New Year's came. Friends invited us to a party downtown, but Emily said she was too tired. I stayed home with her, trying to prove to myself that our marriage still meant something. At midnight, I kissed her and whispered, "Here's to 20 more years." She kissed me back, but her eyes didn't match the words. By February, the distance was undeniable. She started making excuses for why she couldn't join us for family dinners. Work ran late. I promised Lisa I'd help with something. I'm just exhausted. The kids asked where Mom was, and I gave vague answers. Sarah, at 15, started rolling her eyes and muttering, "She's probably out with her friends again." Luke didn't say anything, but I could tell he noticed too. One night, after putting Luke to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Bills spread out before me, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the chair Emily used to fill, night after night. And I thought, is this it? Is this how marriages die? Not with explosions, but with slow disappearances? Then came the breaking point of part 1. It was a Saturday in March. Emily said she had errands to run across town. Groceries, pharmacy, the usual, she said. I nodded, kissed her cheek, watched her drive away. But an hour later I realized she'd left her gym bag in the hallway. Out of curiosity, or maybe desperation, I opened it. Inside were clothes I'd never seen before, a red dress, black heels, nothing like the sweatshirts and yoga pants she usually wore. My chest tightened. This wasn't for errands. This wasn't for groceries. I made a choice that day. A choice I never thought I'd make in 20 years of marriage. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and followed her. Across the river. Into a part of town we rarely visited. Down streets I didn't recognize. Until finally she pulled into a quiet neighborhood, one I'd never seen before. I parked a block away and watched as she got out of the car. She didn't have grocery bags. She didn't go into a store. She walked up the driveway of a house, knocked once, and the door opened. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, smiling, and behind him I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach turn. A child, maybe 6 years old, dark hair. Emily bent down, kissed the child on the head, and walked inside like she belonged there, like she'd been there before, like she lived 2 lives. I sat in my car, frozen. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my vision blurred. 20 years of marriage, of family, of trust, and in one moment, it all fractured. The perfect marriage was dead. I just didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her bending down to kiss that little boy on the head. I saw the man smile as he welcomed her in like she belonged. And I kept replaying the question over and over. What the hell just happened? For 20 years, Emily had been my wife, my partner, my family. And yet, there she was, walking into another man's house like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. When she came home later, around 10, she carried a grocery bag with a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, as if she'd just been shopping. She kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for putting the kids to bed, and chatted about some neighbor's dog like nothing had happened. I nodded, smiled, pretended to listen. Inside, though, I was burning. The next morning, I drove back to that neighborhood. I parked on the same street and just sat there, staring at the house. It was modest, white siding, blue shutters, a swing set in the backyard, a family home. A place where kids played tag in the yard and neighbors waved from porches. And sure enough, a little later, the door opened. The same man stepped out, holding the boy's hand. They walked to a car and drove off. I stayed until Emily arrived. She pulled up, parked, and went inside again. No hesitation, no guilt, just routine. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some random fling. This wasn't a hotel room affair or a one-night mistake. This was something bigger, something older. I started to think words I never thought I'd associate with my marriage. Second life, secret family, betrayal. The following week, I became an investigator in my own life. I started small. I checked our joint bank account. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Mortgage, utilities, groceries. But buried between those charges, I found ATM withdrawals on the other side of town. Always in cash. Always for round numbers. $200, $300, $500. And always on days when she claimed she was with the girls. I dug deeper. I checked her car mileage against her stories. If she was just going to the store, why was she logging an extra 80 miles a week? I checked receipts in her purse. A few from restaurants I'd never been to, all near that same neighborhood. And the phone. God, the phone. She kept it locked, and I didn't know the passcode. But one night, while she was in the shower, I picked it up. My hands shook as I tried the kids' birthdays. Our anniversary. My own birthday. Nothing worked. It was like a brick wall between me and the truth. Still, I wasn't giving up. I started following her. Not every time. I couldn't risk her catching on. But often enough. Book clubs that never discussed books. Errands that took hours longer than they should. She always ended up across town, at that same house. Once I saw her and the man in the backyard grilling burgers while the boy ran circles around them. She looked happy. Happier than she'd looked with me in years. My stomach turned. The worst part wasn't the man. It wasn't even the house. It was the boy. Because every time I saw him, I couldn't help but notice. He looked familiar. Something in his eyes. Something in the way he smiled. A resemblance I didn't want to admit. Could he be mine? The thought gnawed at me. If he was mine, that meant she'd been cheating for years, maybe more than a decade. If he wasn't, it meant she'd built a whole new family with another man. Either way, I was a fool. One night, I decided to test her. I asked her casually, "Hey, Em, want to go on a little trip this weekend? Just us. Maybe to the lake house?" She froze, just for a second, before smiling. "Oh, honey, that sounds wonderful, but Lisa needs me this weekend. She's going through a rough time." Lisa, always Lisa, the most overworked, most stressed, most invisible friend in history. I nodded, pretending to buy it, but inside I was done pretending. That Saturday, when she went to Lisa's, I followed her again. Same neighborhood, same house. But this time, I got out of the car. I stayed across the street, hidden behind a row of hedges, watching. I saw her open the door with a key. A key. Not knocking, not waiting. She had access. She belonged. And then I heard it. Through the open window, her voice floated out. "Dinner's ready, kids." Kids, plural. I froze. My vision blurred. She didn't just have one child there. She had more. And she was calling them like a mother. I left before I could see more. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My heart was pounding so loud, it drowned out the world. That night, lying next to her in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long I'd been living in a lie. How many anniversaries, how many birthdays, how many family dinners had been shared with the shadow of another life she was leading just across town? The truth was unraveling piece by piece, and I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer, because if I did, this betrayal would eat me alive. After that night, sleep became a stranger. I'd lie in bed beside Emily, listening to her slow, steady breaths, wondering how someone could look so peaceful while hiding a life so twisted. The questions ate at me. Who was that man? How long had this been going on? And those kids. God, those kids. Were they hers? Were they his? Were they ours? I couldn't keep living in half-truths. I needed answers. So I did something I never thought I'd do to my wife. I became a spy in my own home. It started with her purse. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I unzipped it, my hands trembling like I was committing a crime. Inside, beneath receipts and lipstick, I found an envelope. Cash, hundreds of dollars, not from our account, I checked, and a receipt for a toy store across town. A toy store I'd never heard of. The next day I drove to that store. I walked the aisles, pretending to shop, until I saw the same clerk's name from the receipt, Janelle. I asked casually, "Hey, my wife might have bought something here recently." "Emily?" Janelle's eyes lit up. "Oh yeah, she comes in pretty often. Bought some Legos and a bike last week. Her kids must love her." Her kids. The words hit like a bullet. I forced a smile, nodded, and left. That night, when Emily kissed me goodbye and said she was off to book club, I felt sick, because I knew exactly where she was going and who she was going to see. I followed again, but this time I didn't stay across the street. I got closer. I parked 2 houses down, slipped into the shadows, and watched. Through the window, I saw them, the man, the kids, and Emily. They were gathered around the dinner table. She was serving spaghetti, laughing, pouring milk into cups. The kids, 3 of them, not just one, called her Mom. My knees nearly gave out. Mom. I stumbled back to my car, gripping the door handle like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My wife, the woman I'd built a 20-year life with, had a second family across town. But the worst part? She looked happy. Happier than she'd looked at our table in years. The following days, blurred. I went to work. I smiled at neighbors. I cheered half-heartedly at Luke's basketball game. On the outside, I was the same old David, but inside, I was unraveling. I needed proof, something undeniable, something she couldn't gaslight me out of. So I hired a private investigator. His name was Ron, a grizzled guy who'd seen too much of this world. When I explained my situation, he didn't even flinch. "You'd be surprised how common this is," he said. "Second families, double lives. Some folks are professional liars." Within a week, Ron had photos. Emily holding hands with the man at a farmer's market. Emily pushing a stroller. Emily at a school play, cheering for a little girl. He dropped the folder on my desk like it was evidence in a trial. And in a way, it was. My trial. My marriage on the stand. But the photo that wrecked me most wasn't of her. It was of the kids. Because the youngest boy, maybe 7, had my eyes. I stared at that photo for hours, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't just hers. He wasn't just his. He might be mine. That night, when Emily came home, I asked her point blank, "Do you love me?" She froze, caught off guard. "Of course I do, David. Why would you even ask that?" But her eyes darted away, and I saw, for the first time, the truth she was terrified I'd uncover. I didn't press further, not yet, because pressing meant war, and I wasn't ready for the battlefield. Instead, I started planning, collecting evidence, mapping out timelines, piecing together the puzzle of the last 20 years. Every smile, every late night, every book club, They all formed a pattern, a map of betrayal. And slowly, a horrifying picture emerged. While I was coaching soccer games, flipping burgers, paying bills, Emily was splitting her life between two homes, two men, two families. I wasn't just betrayed. I was living in a lie so big it swallowed my whole life. The perfect marriage wasn't just cracked, it was shattered. And soon I was going to make her face every piece of broken glass. When you've carried suspicion for months, confrontation feels like loading a gun you never wanted to fire. Every word becomes a bullet, every silence a trigger waiting to snap. I knew I couldn't keep pretending, not with photos in my desk drawer, not with the echo of those kids calling my wife Mom ringing in my ears. But how do you confront the woman you've loved for 20 years? How do you accuse her of building a life across town while she folds laundry in your living room, humming to herself like everything's normal? I waited for the right moment. Or maybe I waited until I couldn't take it anymore. It happened on a Tuesday night. The kids were at a friend's house, the air outside thick with the smell of summer rain. Emily was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for stir-fry. I sat at the table, watching her. My heart pounded so hard I thought she might hear it. Finally, I said it. "Who is he?" The knife froze midair. She looked up slowly, eyes narrowing. "What?" "The man," I said, my voice trembling. "The one across town. The one you've been seeing. Who is he?" For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Just the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock. Then she laughed. A cold, hollow laugh. "David, you're being ridiculous." She shook her head, went back to chopping. "You've always had such an imagination." Gaslighting, straight to the playbook. Deny, dismiss, deflect. I didn't back down. I pulled the folder from under my chair and dropped it on the counter. Photos spilled out across the cutting board. Her with him, her with the kids, her holding hands like she was his wife, not mine. Her face drained of color. The knife clattered into the sink. For a long moment she just stood there, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. Then, slowly, she sat down. "You followed me," she whispered. "You lied to me," I shot back. We stared at each other across the table, 20 years of history between us. Anniversaries, hospital visits, birthday parties, lazy Sunday mornings, all weighed against the crushing weight of betrayal. Finally, she spoke. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Don't insult me, Emily. I saw you. I saw them, the kids. They call you Mom. What the hell do you mean? It's not what I think." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was lonely. You were always working, always distracted. And then Mark, I interrupted. "So he has a name." She flinched. "He was there for me," she continued, voice trembling. "When I felt invisible, he made me feel alive again. I didn't plan for it to last, but then the kids came, and," her voice broke, "I couldn't just walk away." My chest tightened. "The kids, Emily, are they mine?" Her silence was an answer louder than any word. I slammed my fist on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. "Are they mine?" Finally, she whispered, "One of them." The world tilted. My ears rang. My wife of 20 years had been raising another man's children, and one of them was mine, a child I'd never known. A child growing up in another home, calling another man Dad. I stood up, pacing the room, hands gripping my hair. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea what this means for me, for Sarah, for Luke?" Her tears fell freely now. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could keep both. I thought I could make it work." "Both?" I spun on her, fury boiling over. "You thought you could have two families? You thought you could play house in two neighborhoods and no one would notice? I was trying to protect you, she screamed back, her face twisted with desperation. Protect the kids. I didn't want to destroy what we had. What we had? I hissed. Emily, what we had is already dead. The room fell silent, heavy with the truth. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I stood there, shaking, my chest heaving with rage and heartbreak. For 20 years, I believed in us. For 20 years, I trusted her. And now, in one night, the foundation of my life had crumbled. But the confrontation wasn't over. It had only just begun, because betrayal doesn't end with confession. Betrayal demands fallout. And I was about to make her face every ounce of it. The silence after her confession was deafening. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that fills a room like smoke after a fire, choking, suffocating. Emily sat hunched over the table, tears dripping onto her hands, while I paced the kitchen like a caged animal. Finally, I stopped and looked at her. So what's the plan, Emily? You bounce between families until one of us drops dead? Is that it? She shook her head violently. No, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could manage it, keep them apart, keep you all safe. Safe? My voice cracked into a laugh that sounded more like a snarl. You call this safe? You've been living a lie, and you've dragged me, Sarah, and Luke into it without a second thought. Her lip trembled. I still love you, David. No, I said flatly. You don't love me. You love what I provide. The stability, the house, the reputation. I was your cover story while you played house with Mark across town. Her shoulders shook harder, but I wasn't done. The words poured out like venom I'd been bottling up for years. Do you know what's worse than your betrayal, Emily? It's that you thought I was too blind, too stupid to notice. That you thought I'd just keep grilling burgers, paying bills, and smiling for Christmas cards while you split yourself in two. Her sobs filled the room, but they didn't soften me. Not anymore. The next day, the tension was unbearable. Sarah noticed first. At breakfast, she looked between us, her teenage intuition sharper than either of us gave her credit for. What's going on? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Nothing, Emily said too quickly. Sarah's gaze shifted to me. Dad? I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to spill everything right there. We'll talk later, I said quietly. But Emily's eyes flashed with panic. She knew what later meant. That evening, after the kids were in bed, she tried again. Please, David, we can fix this. Therapy, counseling. Just don't tell them yet. Fix this? I shook my head in disbelief. You don't fix a bomb after it's gone off, Emily. You sift through the rubble. Her jaw tightened. If you tell them, you'll ruin everything. I leaned closer, voice low and steady. No, Emily, you ruined everything. I'm just the one pulling back the curtain. Over the next week, the confrontation spread like wildfire through our lives. Sarah overheard one of our late-night arguments and confronted her mother directly. Mom, is it true? Do you have someone else? Emily froze, tears streaming again. It's complicated, honey. Complicated? Sarah's voice cracked with fury. You lied to us, to Dad, to everyone. She stormed out of the room, slamming her door so hard the walls rattled. Luke, younger, didn't understand all the details, but he knew enough. He asked me quietly one night, Dad, is Mom leaving us? That question broke me more than anything. I pulled him close, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you, always. But even as I said it, I knew our family as we'd known it was over. Word didn't stay confined to our house. In small-town America, secrets travel fast. A neighbor spotted Emily across town one afternoon, laughing with Mark at a school fair. By the end of the week, whispers had reached our church, my coworkers, even my parents. One Sunday, after service, my mother pulled me aside. "Is it true?" she asked softly, her eyes wide with heartbreak. "Emily has another life?" I couldn't bring myself to lie. I nodded once. My mom's hand flew to her mouth as if she'd just watched a car crash. My father, stoic as ever, just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll get through this, son." The community that once looked at us as the golden couple now looked at us with pity, with judgment, with gossip whispered over fences and murmured in grocery aisles. Emily, once the queen of neighborhood barbecues, couldn't even walk into the store without sideways glances. She tried to hold her head high, but her shame was written across her face. At home, the fights grew uglier. "You're humiliating me," she snapped one night after word spread further. I laughed bitterly. "You humiliated yourself. I'm just living in the wreckage." Her desperation grew. She begged me to keep quiet, begged me not to divorce her, begged me to think of the kids. But the truth had already poisoned everything. Sarah barely spoke to her. Luke avoided her hugs. The image of stability she'd clung to was crumbling in her hands. And me? I was past the point of no return. I didn't just want the truth. I wanted justice. Because betrayal this deep doesn't end with apologies. It ends with consequences. And as I stared across the dinner table at the woman who had built a second family behind my back, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. Betrayal has a strange way of sharpening your vision. Once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Once the curtain's ripped away, you notice every string that was being pulled behind it. And after Emily's secret life came crashing into the open, there was no putting it back. The fallout was immediate. Sarah refused to eat at the same table as her mother. Luke grew quiet, confused, his once bright smile dulled by tension that hung in the house like fog. I tried to shield them, but how do you protect your kids when the very foundation of their family is splitting apart? Emily begged me to go to counseling. "We can fix this," she said one night, her eyes swollen from crying. "We can rebuild." I stared at her, my jaw tight. "You can't rebuild trust after you've burned it to the ground, Emily. You didn't just make a mistake. You built a second life, a second family. That's not an accident. That's a choice." The divorce papers came next. I filed them quietly, but word spread fast. In a town like ours, divorce isn't just paperwork. It's spectacle. People chose sides. Some whispered that I was cold, that maybe I'd driven her away. Others called her a liar, a fraud. But one thing was certain, our so-called perfect family had become the community's favorite scandal. Then came the custody battles. Emily fought hard. She wanted Sarah and Luke half the time, as if she hadn't already split her attention between two households for years. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, who'd seen every dirty trick in the book, leaned across the table during mediation and whispered, "She doesn't just have skeletons in her closet. She's got an entire graveyard." Karen was right. We presented the investigators' photos, the financial records, the evidence of her second household. The judge's eyebrows nearly shot off his forehead when he saw how deep the deception ran. Emily's lawyer tried to spin it, claimed she was overextended, that she'd been helping a friend who had fallen on hard times. But the photos of her tucking kids into bed and the receipts for toys told a different story. The judge awarded me primary custody. Emily was devastated. She sobbed in the courthouse hallway, clutching her parents for support. And that's when the next betrayal surfaced. Her parents, my in-laws, the same people who'd smiled at me across Thanksgiving tables for 20 years, admitted they'd known. They knew about Mark. They knew about the second family. They hadn't just looked the other way. They'd helped cover it up. When I confronted them, her mother tried to justify it. "We didn't want you to get hurt. We thought if you never found out, everyone could be happy." I laughed in their faces. Happy? You call this happy? You let me raise 2 kids while their mother was living a lie across town. You let Sarah and Luke grow up in a home built on betrayal. You didn't protect anyone. You just helped her dig the hole deeper. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Until then, I'd been surviving. Hurt, angry, devastated. But now I wanted revenge. Not the petty kind, not just shouting matches or slashed tires. No, I wanted a slow, methodical unraveling of the perfect little web Emily thought she could spin forever. I started with the community. People already whispered, but whispers weren't enough. So I told the truth, loudly. At church, at PTA meetings, at barbecues. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. I just laid out the facts. Emily had a second family across town, and her parents helped her hide it. The looks on people's faces were priceless. The queen of the cul-de-sac, the picture-perfect wife, exposed for the fraud she was. Invitations dried up. Friends stopped calling. Even the other moms at school avoided her like she was contagious. Next, I turned to her other life. If she wanted to play house with Mark, I'd make damn sure the foundation cracked there too. I sent Mark an anonymous letter with copies of the same photos I'd given the court. I didn't know what story Emily had spun for him, but now he knew the truth. He wasn't her only man, and his kids weren't her only kids. A week later, I drove past the blue-shuttered house. Mark was on the porch, shouting, red-faced, while Emily stood in the driveway, trying to calm him down. The kids watched from the window, confused and scared. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She'd built this toxic love, this twisted double life. Now she could watch it burn from both ends. But revenge wasn't just about exposure. It was about reclaiming control. About showing her she couldn't destroy my life without consequences. So I went further. I dug into finances, into property records, into anything that could tie her lies together. And the more I uncovered, the more it became clear. Emily wasn't just living 2 lives. She was funding them with pieces of mine. Our money. My hard work. That was where I drew the line. She could cheat on me, lie to me, humiliate me. But she wasn't going to steal from me. Not anymore. Revenge wasn't just a fire burning in my chest anymore. It was strategy, cold and deliberate. Emily had played me for 2 decades, and now I was going to dismantle every lie, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the double life she had built. The financial trail was my first weapon. With Karen, my lawyer, I traced every dollar Emily had siphoned off to support her second family. It was all there in black and white. ATM withdrawals across town, checks cashed in her maiden name, even a secret credit card tied to my income. Every transaction told the story of betrayal in a language the court couldn't ignore. We filed motions. We froze accounts. We demanded restitution. When the judge saw the numbers, his patience evaporated. "Mrs. Miller," he said, staring down at Emily, "you've used marital funds to support an extramarital household. This isn't just unethical, it's fraud." Her face collapsed in humiliation. Mark, sitting in the back of the courtroom, shook his head and walked out before the hearing even ended. That was the last time I ever saw him anywhere near her. Without his support, her second life began to unravel faster than she could control it. The house across town went into foreclosure. The kids she'd raised there were caught in the crossfire, shuttled between angry parents, confused and broken by the chaos. For years, she had juggled 2 families like a circus act, and now the tent had come crashing down. Meanwhile, in our own community, the gossip turned into open scorn. Parents refused to carpool with her. The church board asked her to step down from the choir. Even at the grocery store, whispers followed her down every aisle. She tried to smile, tried to act like nothing had changed, but everyone knew. She had betrayed not just me, but the image she'd so carefully crafted. The perfect wife, perfect mother. That mask was gone for good, but I wasn't done. The final step in my revenge was the most public. I wrote a letter. Not slander, not exaggeration, just the truth. I laid out exactly what she had done, the second family, the deception, the financial theft. I didn't blast it on social media. I sent it privately to the people who mattered most, the pastor, the school board, the women she'd once bragged to at book club, her own extended family. Truth spreads faster than lies, especially when it's uglier than anyone could have imagined. By summer, Emily was radioactive. Mark wanted nothing to do with her. Her parents, ashamed and worn down, retreated into silence. Our kids barely spoke to her outside of court-mandated visits. And in the eyes of the town, she was no longer the golden girl. She was the cautionary tale whispered about at backyard barbecues. As for me, I felt something I hadn't in months. Power. Not happiness, not yet, but power. For so long, I'd been the fool, the man in the dark, the betrayed husband pitied behind closed doors. Now I was the one holding the truth, wielding it like a sword. Some might say revenge doesn't heal. Maybe they're right. But watching Emily's empire of lies collapse brick by brick, watching her sit alone in court, watching her former friends cross the street to avoid her, it didn't just heal me. It gave me closure. One evening, as the sun set over the cul-de-sac, Sarah sat beside me on the porch. She was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "I'm glad you didn't let her get away with it, Dad." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Me too, kiddo. Me too. Because revenge wasn't just for me. It was for Sarah, for Luke, for the years stolen from us by Emily's toxic love and her double life. Emily thought she could cheat the truth forever. She thought she could juggle two families without anyone getting hurt. But in the end, betrayal always collapses under its own weight. And I made damn sure she felt every ounce of it. Revenge is a fire. It burns hot. It clears the ground. But eventually the flames die down, and you're left staring at what's left. After months of legal battles, community fallout, and the slow-motion collapse of Emily's double life, the smoke began to clear. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like a liar's shadow was pressing on my chest. But breathing didn't mean healing. The house was quieter now, too quiet. Sarah and Luke stayed with me most of the time, the court making that official. But even when they were home, the silence was heavy. They'd grown cautious, older than their years. Betrayal doesn't just scar marriages. It etches itself into children's hearts, too. I tried to be steady for them. Dinner every night at 6. Saturday morning pancakes. Cheering at Luke's games, listening to Sarah's endless playlists in the car. I wanted them to know, no matter how messy their mother's choices had been, I was still here. I wasn't going anywhere. But in the quiet hours after they went to bed, when the TV was off and the dishes were done, I'd sit on the porch with a glass of bourbon and stare at the darkened street. That's when the questions crept in. How had I missed it for so long? Was I blind or just too trusting? Had I been a good husband, or had I made it easy for her to look elsewhere? The truth is, betrayal makes you doubt not just your partner, but yourself. You start to wonder if you were ever really loved, or if you were just a placeholder while someone waited for something better. One evening, Sarah joined me on the porch. She didn't say much, just sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the stars. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think Mom ever really loved us?" The question gutted me. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Of course she did. She made terrible choices. But that doesn't erase what you mean to her. Sarah didn't answer, but she leaned against me, and I held her until the mosquitoes drove us inside. I wasn't sure if I believed my own words, but I needed her to. Emily's visits with the kids were strained. Sarah barely spoke to her. Luke went because the court said he had to, but when he came home, he was quiet, withdrawn. One night he asked, "Dad, can we not go to Mom's this weekend?" I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to an 11-year-old that the law doesn't care about broken trust? Meanwhile, Emily tried to rebuild. She rented a small apartment on the edge of town. She still saw the kids from her other family, but without Mark's support, she was juggling on her own. Once, at a school event, I saw her from across the gym. Tired, worn, standing alone while other parents avoided her. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. Then I remembered the photos, the lies, the nights I sat alone while she played house across town. The pity passed. Revenge had given me closure, but it hadn't given me peace. That was something I had to find on my own. So I started focusing on myself. Small things at first, going for runs in the morning, cooking meals that weren't just quick fixes, reading again. I even picked up woodworking, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. The smell of sawdust, the rhythm of sanding, the satisfaction of building something with my own hands, it was therapy. Friends rallied around me, too. Men I'd known for years but never really opened up started inviting me out for beers, for fishing trips, for late-night talks on the tailgate of a truck. One of them, Mike, told me bluntly, "You didn't lose, man. You cut out the cancer. Now you get to live." It wasn't that simple, of course. There were still nights I lay awake replaying it all, nights the bitterness flared like an old wound. But slowly, the anger stopped being the only thing I felt. I started to feel gratitude. Gratitude that I'd found out when I did, not another 10 years down the road. Gratitude that my kids were with me, that they knew who stood by them. Gratitude that the mask was off and I no longer had to pretend. And somewhere deep inside, I started to imagine a future. Not with Emily, that chapter was sealed shut, but maybe, someday, with someone who knew how to be honest. Someone who understood that love isn't about playing two roles, but about choosing one person every single day. The road ahead wasn't easy. It never is after betrayal. But for the first time in years, it felt like it was my road again. The strange thing about betrayal is that after the storm passes, you don't just go back to who you were before. You're different, scarred, sharper, maybe even wiser. You walk through the ruins of what was once your life, and you realize, I survived. Months rolled into a year. The divorce was finalized. Custody settled. Emily became a visitor in our lives rather than a partner. She came around for birthdays, awkward holidays, but the bond we'd once had was gone. She tried to rebuild bridges with Sarah, but Sarah had grown colder, harder. Teenage years already test the bond between mothers and daughters, but betrayal adds barbed wire to that fence. Luke was gentler, still seeking connection, but even he held back in ways he never used to. As for me, I learned to stop looking at Emily as my wife. And she was just a woman I used to know, one who chose infidelity, lies, and toxic love over the family we had built. That realization was liberating. For so long I had thought of myself as the betrayed husband, the man who'd lost. But the truth, she lost far more than I did. She lost her reputation. She lost the trust of her children. She lost the stability I had provided. She lost the version of herself that people once admired. I still had scars, but I also still had a life. There were nights I'd sit in the living room, the kids in bed, the house quiet, and I'd let myself feel the weight of it all. The anger, the sadness, the emptiness. But instead of drowning in it, I let it pass through me. Pain, like any storm, has an end. Revenge had its place. Exposing her lies, reclaiming my dignity, making sure she felt the consequences. All of that gave me strength when I needed it. But over time, I realized revenge can't be the destination. It's only the bridge you cross to get to something else. Healing. And healing meant choosing not to let betrayal define me forever. One Saturday morning, months after everything settled, I took Sarah and Luke to the lake. We rented a little boat, packed sandwiches, and spent the day fishing and laughing under the sun. At one point, Sarah looked at me, really looked at me, and smiled. Not the guarded smile she'd been giving since the truth came out, but the easy, carefree smile of a kid who felt safe again. In that moment, I knew I hadn't just survived. I'd rebuilt. Life didn't end because Emily had a second family across town. Life changed. And change, painful as it was, forced me to grow. I started opening myself to new possibilities. I didn't jump into dating right away. God knows I wasn't ready for that. But I started meeting new people, joining new groups, saying yes to things I would have ignored before. Hiking trips, community events, even a cooking class. And little by little, I started to feel like me again. Not David, the betrayed husband, just David. Sometimes when I'd run into Emily around town, I'd see the weight she carried. The lines on her face deeper, her smile brittle. She'd look at me with eyes that seemed to say, "I'm sorry," though the words rarely came. Maybe she regretted it all. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter anymore, because betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was just the middle. The end, or rather the next chapter, was mine to write. And here's what I've learned, what I want anyone listening to this story to carry with them. Love without honesty is just performance. Family without loyalty is just a house with strangers inside. And betrayal, as devastating as it is, doesn't get the final word unless you let it. I let revenge give me strength. I let truth set me free. But ultimately, I chose resilience. Because after 20 years together, I discovered my wife had a second family across town. But after everything, the lies, the infidelity, the toxic love, the heartbreak, I discovered something even more important. I discovered myself.